Sorry about that, babe.
Breath of Fire 3. Finally, after years of toiling around with Breath of Fire 1 replays and a fun stream playthrough of Breath of Fire 2 almost 2 years ago now, we finally advanced our way through the series into the wild world of the Sony PlayStation. Now, I do want to apologize for those that wanted to see my playthrough of this. Sadly, we ran into a string of live streaming issues, which then bled into time issues, resulting in my Let's Play being cancelled as well. Maybe at some point I will do a recorded run, but for now, you'll have to settle for this. Breath of Fire 3 was developed and published by Capcom, released in North America in 1998 for the Sony PS1. I've heard so many great things about Breath of Fire 3 over the years, lots of the members of the community were hyped for it, but did it live up to said hype for me? The story. Breath of Fire 3 starts out with Ryu being found in a mine in baby dragon form. While trying to escape, he gets captured and transported, falling off and winding up in the Cedar Woods in naked kid form by wandering thieves named Ray and Tipo. Some lower-end thieving hijinks occur, a trip to Mount Glaus which ends up being pretty sad, and eventually leading to the game's first big story bit revolving around stealing money from the town's mayor and the haunted McNeil Manor. Now, as always, I don't like spoiling too much in my reviews despite these games being ancient at this point, but I wanted to point out that while at times the story can be a bit tropey, especially in the Breath of Fire universe, think God, I felt like as the game progressed, the more interesting it got. Breath of Fire 3 was a little bit slow to start, not just for the story, but an overall theme which I'll touch on later. Down the stretch, however, I was downright captivated and really felt the feels. When I concluded my journey, I really sat in it for a while to let things simmer. Graphics. In this era of gaming with the PS1, Saturn, and N64, I'm generally not a fan of the 3D/polygon style, unless it's something like Resident Evil or Silent Hill. Thankfully, Breath of Fire 3 did not go down that route, and they opted for a more refined 2D look with an isometric angle. Breath of Fire 3 excels on the graphical front. The characters, enemies, and NPCs all look fresh and unique for the most part. The world seems bright, vibrant, and lively. The different areas of said world are well defined. The battle sequences are slick and intriguing, without being too over the top with overtly long spell animations and the like. I don't really have anything bad to say about the graphics. It's done in my favorite type of graphical style, and I think most RPG goers could take a quick look at it and go, oh yeah, that's Breath of Fire 3, which says enough, meaning it has its own identity, and a good one at that. Music and sound. Breath of Fire 3 certainly brings an interesting music and sound design to the table. First off, the sound is actually pretty good. Many times throughout the game, certain areas and moments are very atmospheric. I quite enjoy the catchphrases and noises that the characters utter during certain moves during battles. Ray is one that stands out to me, and I'll just say an interesting one from Nina. I'll let you do the math there. The combat sounds are generally satisfying, menuing makes sense, and all in all, I don't have many issues with the sound. Now for the music. This certainly was an intriguing turn for the Breath of Fire series. At the helm were composers Yoshino Aoki and Akari Kaida. At times, the soundtrack does have a Breath of Fire feel, but the vibes are completely different on the whole from the first two entries. The main word to sum it up would be jazz, or jazzy. At first I liked the soundtrack, but was unsure of how I felt in terms of, was this the right one for the game? Is this a soundtrack that I could listen to while not playing? Because frankly, the first two Breath of Fire OSTs, aside from the dungeon music in Breath of Fire 2, are some of my most replayed bangers. As time went on, the more I enjoyed what it had to offer, but I could totally see the soundtrack rubbing some people the wrong way. But it's hard to deny the fact that it's well composed, high quality, and features an array of vibes amongst the overall jazziness. I'm gonna get into the habit of listing some of my favorite tracks in the description below so you could more easily check them out, but I will name them here in the review as well. The regular battle theme, Do Your Best, is a certified hood classic. No matter how many times you hear it, it never gets old. The Cedar Woods theme, aka Falling Green, yeah, it's basically a Chrono Trigger ripoff, but that's a good thing. The beautiful light feeling that the song Healing gives, the tune that plays while Ryu is resting in Teepo's bed, is wonderful. You get some wonderful atmospheric jazzy vibes with Take It and Run during some early game thieving expeditions. To a Distant Place, aka Far, aka the Overworld theme too. Don't get me wrong, I like the first Overworld theme, but this one hit a little bit differently for me. And my favorite track of the game, Eden, which occurs early in the game as well as towards the very end, a very nostalgic feeling rushes through me every time I hear it. I'm gonna stop there because I could go on for a while given the size of this OST, but I'm gonna assume that most of you love it already, and if you were on the fence about it, perhaps let it simmer a little bit longer, and you'll probably see or hear the light. Controls. Now for the only technical aspect of Breath of Fire 3 that frankly I wasn't a fan of. Firstly, the menuing both in and out of battle is good enough. I didn't have any issues there, and it's basically what's expected of a turn-based RPG from this era. But secondly, the area that grinded my gears were the controls navigating towns, dungeons, and the overworld. For me, it was incredibly clunky. Even after 40 plus hours in the game, I still had some of the same struggles that I had early on. The isometric angles could lend itself to some very awkward movement throughout the game, especially when you're trying to be very tight and concise, like during many of Breath of Fire 3's minigames. I constantly would find myself overshooting a bookshelf to search, a save area, something small to interact with, and so on, leading to general frustration, and at the worst of times, extra battles when realistically it should have never happened. Now, this could be easily countered with Get Good, but the reality is at times the controls felt very stiff to me. And this is coming from a fan of the tank controls from the Resident Evil series. I don't want to belabor much longer as this is a minor part in your overall enjoyment, or lack thereof. Thankfully, Breath of Fire 3 wasn't an action RPG, so the annoyances that I had here ended up being pretty minor in the long run. Gameplay and fun factor. On the whole, Breath of Fire 3 is a very smooth and fun game to play with a lot more to offer in certain areas compared to its predecessors. Now, even though I have some issues with the controls themselves, navigating the town's dungeons and overworld is an interesting and rewarding experience. There will be plenty of solid conversation and good information to be found, as well as a myriad of secrets and loot to discover, which can be aided by tilting the camera by holding the R1 button and moving the D-pad. One thing that's been a critique from the masses regarding the Breath of Fire series on the SNES was the encounter rate and the fact that at many times it's too high. Breath of Fire 3 still has a pretty high encounter rate when it comes to navigating dungeons, but one of the trade-offs is now in the overworld, you do not have to fight anything if you don't want to. When wandering and searching, if an exclamation mark pops up above your head, you can choose to go into a battlefield scenario, possibly find some loot, slay some baddies and get experience, or you could avoid it altogether. Moving on further with the combat system, it's pretty straightforward. You have the ability to attack, defend, use an item, examine an enemy to possibly learn a special ability or skill, or use an ability, such as attack, magic, skill, heal, or assist. There's also the option to escape or engage in an auto attack style known as CHG or charge forward. There are a few battle formations you can put your party in order to maximize their strengths or hide their weaknesses, though truthfully, I didn't mess with this feature too much and didn't suffer much from its lack of usage. The Examiner skill system is a pretty unique feature in Breath of Fire 3 that could lead to some optimized builds and help scratch that completionist itch. You could even have someone learn a skill and then pass it to another party member at camp via a Skill Inc. item. While cool and possibly very rewarding, I didn't find myself utilizing this too much beyond the beginning of the game, as at times I felt it to be a bit time-consuming and cumbersome, and frankly it wasn't necessary to complete the game, as I barely used it and was able to clear it with minimal grinding and no game overs. Speaking of the camps, you could set these up while on the overworld in designated spots, allowing you to talk to your teammates, rest, heal, save, check your skill notes, and look at your master list. The Masters are another upgraded and new feature, kind of like the Shamans from Breath of Fire 2, but also not really as they have nothing to do with fusions, but rather character growth and skills. There are a wide variety to be found throughout the journey, some are very well in the open, and some require some side questing and or secrets to unlock them. The gist of the Masters are they will allow whatever characters to learn under them, and they get different level and skill gains. Bunyan, for example, has a level gain of HP plus 2, power plus 2, defense plus 1, neutral on agility, but has a negative for intelligence of 3 and AP of 2. You also have the ability to learn 4 skills from Bunyan, each at a different set level. So when said character reaches 2 levels under Bunyan's tutelage, if you report back, you will then learn the skill Risky Blow. This system can be very in-depth and really bring up more instances of completionism and instances of min-maxing. I kept my mastering very surface level and streamlined and was yet again able to get through the journey without too much difficulty, so don't sweat the small stuff if you don't want to deep dive into a guide. With that being said, this is a pretty cool and fun system that could certainly spark some replay value. Touching back on the transformation aspect, I want to point out that the Dragon Gene system for Ryu is by far the best instance of dragon transformations until this point in the Breath of Fire series. Not only are there a litany of combinations that you could put together by combining ability genes, non-ability genes, and the Forbidden 5 genes, finding many of the genes in various hidden Chrism ore pieces is an adventure all by itself. I found myself mostly transforming to meet the needs of boss weaknesses and or spamming the complete Kaiser triple towards the tail end of the game. But there are a ton of things that could be done here, yet again lending itself to some good replay value. I'm not an expert on it, so I'll share a wiki link in the description if you're curious of all the different things that can happen with the Dragon Gene system. With all that being said, it is a clear step up and much appreciated. Speaking of improvements, I found that the fishing and town building minigames are also vastly improved in Breath of Fire 3. The leap in fishing from Breath of Fire 1 to 2 was quite large, but to 3 is even larger. I would often find myself fishing just for the heck of it. The same general process applies. You use different rods and baits to catch certain fish, which could be consumed, sold, or traded to the special Manilo shops at various fishing spots by using the coin bait. But the act of fishing itself is a very fun and addicting minigame, so many kudos there. The township portion of Breath of Fire 2 was not something that I explored well, as I played the game mostly blind. Later on in Breath of Fire 3, you're able to play its version of the township build and that of the fairy village. I was actually having a really fun time with it my first few sessions, but admittedly there was a segment later on where I made a wrong move with my job or task allocation, didn't check back in for a while, and my village wasn't doing so hot. This is definitely another one of those game within a game scenarios, so if you want to excel at it, I highly recommend using a guide. The fairy village, if done right, could yield some great weapons, items, accessories, free gifts, gambling, fortune telling, and even copying items. Of course, if you don't basically get them all killed off like I did. While I did not suffer a game over in Breath of Fire 3, that does not mean that the game is a cakewalk, nor does it mean that it's overly punishing. I felt the difficulty of Breath of Fire 3 was just right, requiring minimal grinding at the most, and allowing an easier time and further gain for those willing to explore deeper on with the masters, skills, and minigames. I found myself very hooked into the mechanics, gameplay, world, and the story of Breath of Fire 3 after some time, and was completely enthralled by the final stages of the game. Some other bits that I wanted to touch on regarding Breath of Fire 3 were that the game is littered with many funny spots, tug on the heartstring moments, meaning of life or spirituality themes, and even nods to other games in the Capcom universe. I'm also having to add this after I already recorded my voiceover. I somehow forgot to mention that every character has their own unique action. For example, Ryu has his sword where he could chop things, Gar is incredibly strong and can move objects, Momo has her bazooka and can blast open secret passages, and so forth. Oftentimes throughout the game, certain characters will be needed in order to progress in certain areas, or certain characters could find secrets, given said abilities. All in all, Breath of Fire 3 was a good time. But as always, it's not without its flaws, and there were more than a few things that grinded my gears. Critiques. I'll first start with some very minor ones. While I found the translation and dialogue to be generally good and engaging, there were many instances of dialogue getting cut off awkwardly in the box in transitions to the next words or sentences. It made for a pretty awkward read, especially at the beginning when I was attempting to stream and do a let's play. Again, minor. I also touched on it already, so I'll just mention it. The controls in terms of navigating towns, dungeons, and the overworld felt a little stiff and wonky to me. I oftentimes struggled with proper positioning and pathing, even until the end of my journey. And I'm unsure if this is a full-on critique or just a half one, but I'm undecided on the overworld portion of Breath of Fire 3. It's certainly nice not to get blasted with random encounters, but the makeup felt very segmented and less open compared to that of Breath of Fire 2. You don't even get a faster form of travel until pretty late in the game with the teleportation system, and by that point, unless you're being a completionist, you don't really use it all that much. So yeah, with the new overworld, it's one of those instances where I applaud the game being different, but I think I preferred the traditional overworld style of the other games. Another critique that seems to be shared amongst a few people is that I wasn't entirely roped into this game until close to my 18-hour mark. I was having fun, don't get me wrong, and it's not like the beginning of the game is bad or anything. It just didn't sink its claws into me until a pivotal part of the story where major time passes. Thankfully from that point on, which was still about half the game, I was all in and ready to rock. Now I want to wrap up with my biggest critique of Breath of Fire 3. The mandatory minigames and side quests are so annoying. So much so that a particular segment in the last half of the game, which I was thoroughly enjoying, made me not want to play for a few days after completing it. The first super annoying instance of this for me was training Bade before the lighthouse section. I basically wanted to fall asleep, and the most interesting part about that section was when a basement millipede crawled under my foot unknowingly while training him, and I stepped on it, giving me a jump scare. But sadly, it doesn't stop just there. Whether it be finding the pieces of the ship to build later on, a little tedious. The segment where you're pulling rope on the beach, brutal. The Shisu quest section where you need to make the fish dish for a particular character to eat, consisting of some brutal minigames such as pulling up buckets of water from a well, to Ogre Road to chop horseradish and so on. It brought the game to a screeching halt for me on a personal enjoyment level and just made it feel slow. Which again, at times, the beginning of the game also felt slow to me. This rears its ugly head once again later on while traversing the Desert of Death. Honestly guys, for me, I can't cope with all these spots that I just mentioned, rationalize them, or make them seem more fun than what they really are. I'm just not a fan. In summation, Breath of Fire 3 is an incredibly solid advancement of the Breath of Fire world from a technical standpoint, gameplay standpoint, and optional content standpoint. A captivating journey with beautiful graphics, a unique and sweet soundtrack, good enough story, a very strong finish, held back by some janky controls at times, bouts of slowness in terms of progression and feel, and despite having the best fishing to date, a ton of tedious minigames and fetch quests that bring the pacing to a screeching halt numerous times throughout. With that being said, the sum of Breath of Fire 3's positives far outweigh the negatives in my critiques. I give Breath of Fire 3 on the Sony PS1 a 8 out of 10. If you haven't played it already, I do recommend it. If you have, perhaps give it another go. Now, if I have to do a quick comparison to the first two entries, I think Breath of Fire 3 is clearly a better game than Breath of Fire 1, though I do feel like Breath of Fire 1 is the most easily replayable of the three. And despite how much I did enjoy Breath of Fire 3, I still give the nod to Breath of Fire 2 as the best of the first three. I'm looking forward to seeing what Breath of Fire 4 holds. And yes, I'll play Dragon Quarter as well. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to check out some other Breath of Fire 3 content, like various shorts featuring tidbits and tips, or an unboxing of Breath of Fire 3, check out the pinned comment description below or end screen. Take care.